Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 16 of Non-Monogamy Help. I'm Lola Phoenix. Non-Monogamy Help is a relationship advice podcast for people in non-monogamous, polyamorous, or open relationships. The podcast comes out every other week, and every other week there's not a podcast, there's a column, just so you know. You can send your letters to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com, and they'll either be on the podcast or the column, anonymously, of course, and if you have any preferences as to which one, you can always specify. You can read the columns at medium.com/non-monogamy-help. If you want to get the columns and the podcast in your inbox ahead of time, a couple of days ahead of time, and be really cool, you can subscribe to the email newsletter at tinyletter.com/non-monogamy-help, no hyphens. If you want to be amazing and become a patron of the podcast, that would be super awesome. Patrons who pledge $5 or more a month get their names read if they would like to. I always ask your consent first and ask which name you prefer at the end of the podcast, so that's another reason to be super cool. You can go to patreon.com/Lola Phoenix to become a patron of the podcast. Even $1 a month is awesome. I appreciate anything that goes towards the podcast. And you can also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/non-monogamy-help, no hyphens. Exciting. All right, so let's get to this week's letter. I'm not sure who to talk about this, but my anxiety levels have been skyrocketing recently, and I'm trying to understand how I should be feeling. I've been dating a girl for about 3 months, and it has been a very intense 3 months. We both completely fell in love with each other. She just moved to Japan for 5 months and made it clear that she would be sleeping with other people. I've never done anything like this before, and I'm having an extremely difficult time with it. Her ex-boyfriend has stayed at her house, she's seeing other guys constantly, and we talk about it, and I don't know how to deal with it. I'm trying not to let jealousy ruin our relationship, but I'm not sure if it's just jealousy. I can't tell if I should be completely okay with this situation or not. I just need some advice on how to navigate this. I feel incredibly alone and disconnected from her, and I feel like she expects me to just be completely okay with it. Anyways, I appreciate any feedback or advice you can give me. So, the first thing that I have to say is this doesn't sound like a mutual decision. Like you say, you've been together for 3 months, she's moved to Japan for 5 months, and she made it clear that she will be sleeping with other people. I think fear is totally normal for most people. Even people who are like, yes, I want to be non-monogamous, I want to do this, even people who have actually had a history of cheating will find that their partners, anyone they're with, dating other people, sends them into a huge amount of anxiety. And I think that's quite normal. And I think people often mistake that for jealousy. And I don't think it always is jealousy. I think it's just a fear, that your partner is dating someone else and you might lose them, which is really, really understandable. But the thing that I kind of advise people to focus on is what they get out of non-monogamy and why either they feel it's inherent to who they are or they feel they chose it. And the thing that I'm kind of missing here is it doesn't really seem like you've chosen it. It's just sort of seemed like she said, I'm going to Japan and I'm going to sleep with other people, which, she's allowed to do, but I don't know why it is that you've accepted that. It just seems like you haven't really talked this decision through. I mean, I can see a situation where, you have an intense 3 months together and she's going away for 5 months. And that's, it's not necessarily, especially if you've had a really, really good relationship, it's not necessarily a reason to break up. I mean, 5 months is a long time, but it isn't a long time. And, you could always come to an agreement where you say, okay, for the 5 months that we're apart, you can do whatever, and then what happens after that? I'm not really sure if this non-monogamy that she's decided she's going to do is because she's in Japan or because this is the way she wants to do relationships. I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions here, and that's probably the source of a lot of your anxiety. I think even if you were totally up for non-monogamy, her expecting that you are okay with it also is not helping. It's only adding to the situation. And so I think, the first thing that you really need to figure out is, and this might be quite difficult because you've only been together for 3 months. That's not really necessarily a long time to start making big life decisions or when to say, are we going to be together for the next year? But it would be good to have a discussion and talk more about if this non-monogamy is a temporary situation or a permanent situation. If it's only a temporary situation, then you could kind of have what's called a don't ask, don't tell agreement, which a lot of people don't really consider ethical for understandable reasons. But I think in your situation, if you're struggling to hear about all of the people that she might be with, and you don't need to hear that information because you don't see her, you don't necessarily need to hear that information. But even then, I think the struggle that you're going to have is one that I think all long distance people have. When you're long distance with someone, even if, you're monogamous, it puts a strain on the relationship because a lot of people need that daily reconnection. And I do think that long distance relationships, like regardless of whether you're, non-monogamous or not, in order to feel connected with your partner, I think you really need to set time aside, and you really need to say, all right, Tuesdays is the day we call each other and we have a little phone date. That seems really arbitrary and sometimes a little bit forced, but I do think that especially with long distance situations where you don't have that presence of that person, it really shows that you have that kind of commitment towards one another. But there's so many unanswered questions for you here, like, what are you to her? What are her, she is going to Japan for 5 months, but what happens after that? It's very, very understandable for you to be afraid. And I think that it will help you to be a little bit easier on yourself and for her to be a little bit easier on you. Like, I'm not sure what you mean by she expects me to just be completely okay with it, because if you agree to a situation, and that's why asking based on permission can be really, really tricky. If she said, I'm going to be sleeping with other people, are you okay with that? And you said yes, it can then be quite difficult when you do struggle with it because you feel like you've kind of already given permission. That expectation that person has when you say, yes, I am okay with it, maybe isn't, it can be quite tricky because yes, you were okay with it in the moment when it was just a concept, but when it became reality, it became a lot more difficult for you to cope with, which is understandable, but it still creates a kind of difficulty in managing that. I don't think that it's just jealousy. I don't think that anyone, even if they are totally au fait with non-monogamy, and I'm not really sure you are, like, you don't really say, yeah, I'm interested in non-monogamy, this is where I want my life to go, this is what I'm interested in. You don't really say if it's a temporary situation or if this is how she permanently wants to do things. Even if you were, in either situation, whether you were okay with it being temporary or you're totally on board for non-monogamy for the rest of the conceivable time that you are together, it would still be quite normal for you to be scared. And especially with that long distance and that lack of communication and that inherent feeling, there's always going to be that inherent imbalance in between you two because you can't see each other. And you're always going to feel, I definitely think in situations where you have a long distance partner and they have someone that they can see, you're going to feel like you are going to feel a little bit of jealousy in that situation because that person can see your partner and you can't. I think quite often jealousy gets used in this way in polyamory advice where it seems like it's never an acceptable reaction to something when, in my opinion, and I get quite pedantic about it at times, jealousy is wanting something that someone else has. And if these people have, access to your partner, whether they can stay the night, whether they can see your partner all the time, you want that. You want what they have, and that's a completely and 100% understandable thing to want and then to feel jealous over. And the way you deal with that is by having a partner that's understanding and empathetic to that, and you have a partner that is willing to show you that you matter to them by setting aside time if that's what makes you, it depends on what makes you feel worthy to someone. Does it help to set aside time? Does it help for them to tell you how much, little emails saying, oh, I just thought of you today or something like that? It really depends on you and what makes you feel valued by someone. And I think that's worth exploring. But I think before any of all this, to kind of sum up, I think you need to figure out what the agreement is. Is this temporary? Is this permanent? I'm a little bit concerned. I mean, I don't know if things happened exactly the way you say it, where she literally just said, I'm going to be sleeping with other people. The end. And I mean, I guess that's direct communication, but at the same time, it just seems a little, it's not to say that you necessarily should control what she does, and I'm not trying to say that, but I kind of feel like saying, when you put your cards on the table like that and say, this is what I'm going to do, at that point you can say, I'm not comfortable with that. The end of the relationship is here. Having a discussion with someone about a choice that you want to make can sometimes feel like it's about permission, and I think that can be really tricky because I don't like giving permission, and I really do think that whenever people are put in a position by someone that they really care for, they're really interested in, to give permission, they're going to want to say yes. They're not going to want to say no. So generally speaking, you are going to be compelled to say yes, especially if it means that the relationship might end. But I just feel like there's a way that it can be handled that kind of is a better balance, rather than just saying, I'm going to be sleeping with other people. And then especially afterward, the fact that you say that she kind of expects you to be okay with it. It's one thing to sort of set things out and tell your partner, like, this is the decision I'm going to make. It's my life. I'm making this decision. And then to just expect that they should be fine with it, especially such a big change, and not be willing to invest kind of the emotional reassurance and the time it takes to help you cope with the difference that this has for you. I'm a little bit worried about that. I think that you should really ask yourself if this is the kind of approach you want to these type of situations, whether or not you end up non-monogamous or not. Like, maybe it is just a temporary thing while she's in Japan, and maybe you can deal with it for 5 months and then she comes back. Regardless of whether or not you're into or not into non-monogamy, her behavior in this instance has really demonstrated the way that she's going to handle things. And if this is the way that she handles this, how is she going to handle other big decisions in the life that you may envision yourself having with her? And I think that's something that's really worth thinking about. Figure out what the agreement is. Like I said, I know it's only 3 months in. It's hard to be like, oh, I plan on marrying you. Like, you're probably not at that stage. But having an idea of what it is, she's thinking. Why has she chosen this? Is it temporary? Is it not? Like, getting more clarity on that, I think, would help your anxiety a little bit. I think you need to give yourself permission, and she needs to give you permission to be afraid, especially so early in this relationship. You're only 3 months in. You like each other, yeah, and you got a lot of new relationship energy going on, but you haven't yet established your full familiarity with each other. You're building trust. And, we give people, like, the benefit of the doubt when we begin to know them and we trust them, but that doesn't mean that it's not scary. And it's a very scary position for you to be put in, for her to be put in as well. When you're just starting off in a relationship, you're just getting to know each other, you're just starting to build trust, you're just starting to get used to it, and then to have this major thing happen. Like, you need to be a little bit more forgiving, because this would be a very difficult thing for even people who have spent 25 years together and are just trying this, like, and have loads and loads of trust, and as well as like a mortgage and children together. Like, this is a huge thing to try, and it's not easy, and it's a big change, and it requires a little bit of patience on both your part, with you with yourself and her with you. The thing that I always kind of cling to whenever I'm having a lot of panic and fear that my partner's going to leave me, first thing that I try to remind myself is there's absolutely nothing I can do to control that. And that's a really terrifying thing to think about. There's nothing I can do to keep, because I think my brain, especially with anxiety, always tries to convince me that if I do this, it's kind of like the remnants of OCD is kind of like, if you do this, you can stop this from happening. If you compulse, you can stop this terrible thing from happening in your brain. And I think it carries over. If I am the perfect partner, if I make sure that I do this or that, and, I can prevent someone from leaving me, and it's just not true. And it's scary to think that, but I think it also can be quite liberating. So I do think that, like, that's really helpful to cling to whenever you're having all this anxiety. But the other thing that's really helpful to cling to is what you get out of non-monogamy. There's some people who feel like non-monogamy for them is a orientation. I, don't necessarily feel like it's an orientation for me, but I do feel like it's a choice, and it's a purposeful choice that I've made for a good reason. And I cling to that whenever I feel anxious. I remember, okay, I chose this because I know that I don't want monogamy for these reasons. And that's just something that I go back to. And the thing I worry about here is that if you haven't chose this, and it's just been something that's been pushed upon you, it's going to be really hard for you to figure out what the purpose is. But I don't think exploring that is necessarily bad, because it might be that you look at the situation and you go, right, I've known this person for 3 months. We do have a really good connection. You can't have that connection with other people. And it might be genuinely worth exploring the idea of, is it worth it? Is it worth this anxiety? If it's a temporary situation for 5 months, is it worth all of this? That's not a question I can answer for you. That's a question you have to answer for yourself. But I do think if, exploring what you get out of non-monogamy or what you don't get out of it is really going to help you figure out, either help you have something to tether to when you are having a lot of anxiety to remind yourself of, or help you figure out that maybe this situation isn't for you. Maybe non-monogamy isn't for you. And that's okay. It can be not something that you want to deal with. And I remind people, like, it breaking up and having a relationship not work out isn't a failure, isn't necessarily reflective of a failure on anyone's part. And even though it really sucks, you can have two people who absolutely love each other and who are perfect for each other in multiple ways, but there's a very fundamental incompatibility that they just can't get past, that there is no compromise on. And I do think that some people can compromise with non-monogamy, but some people just can't. It's just not something they're into. It's not something they want to do. When they try it, it devastates them, and that's legitimate, and that's fine. But it's, like I said, that's a question that you unfortunately have to answer for yourself. It's not a question that I can answer for you. That's kind of like the best thing that I can say in response to this is just, like I said, figure out what the direction is and figure out if that's a direction that you want to go in. I hope that helps, and good luck. Thank you so much for listening. Again, I really, really would like letters. I tried to respond to all letters within 7 days of receiving them. You can send your letters to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com, and yes, they will be read either in the podcast or the column, and you can specify which if you would like. As part of Patreon and thanking people who are patrons, I would like to, at the moment of this recording, thank my patrons. And they are Laura Boylan, Chris Albery-Jones, Franzi, and James Wartell. So yeah, those people are the best, and you should become a best person too. That was really weirdly worded. Please become a patron if you can. Even $1 a month is super awesome. It doesn't matter if you don't do dollars. It somehow works out anyway with your bank. And also, if you don't know how Patreon works, it's amazing. So let's say you're okay, I want to give $1 per episode, but I can't give more than $5 a month. You can totally do that no matter how many episodes I release, which is usually just once a week, but no matter how many episodes or podcasts I release, you will only get charged that max amount. So it's super cool. So definitely try it if you can spare $1 a month. Even, it's just like when I get an email and it's you have another patron, I'm just yay! And you get access to the columns in the podcast. You also get other non-fiction-y bits that I do, if you're of interest in any of that. Poetry zines, science fiction stuff. When I do NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month in November, I'd post some excerpts of things I'm writing, so you get other cool, interesting things as well. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening, and you will hear the next podcast in the next week. Awesome. Thank you. You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. Our podcast music has been provided by Chris Albery-Jones at albery-jones.com, and the art was made by Dom Jung at domduong.com. Thank you for listening.